During the past few days, in what has been a very difficult and sensitive time around the world, obviously as the New Zealand Prime Minister and I have been addressing the terrorist attacks in Christchurch, remarks have been made by the Turkish President Erdogan that I consider highly offensive to Australians and highly reckless in this very sensitive environment. They are offensive because they insult the memory of our Anzacs and they violate the pledge that is edged in the stone at Gallipoli of the promise of Ataturk to the mothers of our Anzacs. So I understand the deep offence Australians would be feeling about this. It is truly upsetting. I have conveyed that in the strongest of possible terms to the Turkish ambassador today, and I do not accept the excuses that have been offered for those comments. There will be further meetings held today between our ambassador and the Turkish government, and foreign ministers will also discuss this matter today, but I have made it very clear about where Australia stands on this matter. Also, the travel advisory to Turkey is obviously under review, and that is a process that will take some time, and when that has been concluded, we will make a further announcement.
2 weeks from an election and days after the Christchurch massacre, the Turkish president issues a disturbing threat.
Aynı niyetle gelecekseniz
Australians with anti-Muslim views, he says, who visit his country will be sent back in coffins like their grandfathers. A reference to Turkey's victory over the Anzacs at Gallipoli in World War I.
kimi tabutla geri döndüler.
In Canberra, the Prime Minister was angry, describing the comments as highly offensive and reckless. The Prime Minister wants an apology from the Turkish leader and warns he's prepared to take further action.
I can tell you that all options are on the table.
Meaning Australia could expel diplomats or bring ours home.
Now, 2 months earlier, Lord Kitchener, British Secretary of State for War, who didn't think much of either Turkish military skills or British colonial armies, had sarcastically claimed that the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps troops, Anzacs, would be adequate for a cruise in the Marmara. And so it was they, diverted from heading to the Western Front to fight this supposedly quick and easy battle against the Turks, who were put ashore. But not at the proposed landing site, Gaba Tepe, which would have led to an advance across level ground, but further north at Ari Burnu, beneath the heights of Chunuk Bair. Commander Charles Dix, in charge of the landing, said straight off the bat, "Tell the Colonel that the damn fools have landed us a mile too far north." The landing spot would be christened Anzac Cove. The landing itself was mostly unopposed, but after a few hours, the Turkish battery near Gaba Tepe began shelling the soldiers on the landing beach. Those men began to push inland, taking heavier casualties, but still pressing on, up steep terrain, trying to take the high ground. Late in the afternoon, the Turks holding the crest ran out of ammunition and began to withdraw. Now, as some Australian troops approached the crest, a Turkish divisional commander named Mustafa Kemal, who would one day be known as Ataturk, the father of all Turks, reached the men who were pulling out, and since they had no ammunition, he ordered them to halt, fix bayonets, and lie down facing the enemy. As soon as they lay down, so did the enemy, giving the Turks some time. One of Kemal's top regiments was on the eastern slopes of Chunuk Bair at the time, and they managed to arrive at the crest before the Australians could with a battery of guns. Kemal realized that if the crest were not held, then the whole position on the peninsula might be lost. 1 Turkish and 2 Arab regiments soon arrived as reinforcements, and the fighting continued the rest of the day. To say it was bloody was an understatement. Wave after wave of Turks and Arabs threw themselves down on the Anzacs, were destroyed by machine gun fire, and then more men climbed over the bodies of the previous wave. There was no rest, and by nightfall, both sides were completely exhausted. Kemal tried to get his men to continue the fight, but nobody would or even could. The Ottoman forces still held the crest, while the Anzacs held the western slopes of Chunuk Bair. General Sir Ian Hamilton, when informed of the situation, said that it was okay because the Southern force that would advance in the morning should take off the pressure. This was about as optimistic as one could possibly be. Indeed, by sunset on the 26th, the Allies had landed more than 30,000 troops. However, they had also suffered more than 20,000 dead and wounded. There were so many ways to die that in hindsight, opening yet another front seems almost a criminal waste of life, but it was still happening again and again, and it was certainly not happening well. This week at the Dardanelles, the seas actually ran red with blood. Do you realize how frightening that is? How that must have looked? But this Allied plan of Winston Churchill's, this backdoor to win the war, how ill-conceived was the whole concept to begin with? Germany was not going to be beaten by an attack on Turkey. There was no back door to attacking Germany. There were no allies whose removal would make Germany collapse. Gallipoli is often romanticized in films and books, but for all of the individual moments of glory, it was an exercise in butchery, pure and simple. Since April, they had been there. They had attacked again and again and again, but to no avail. They were the Allied forces at Gallipoli, worn down by months of casualties, decimated by disease, and unable to knock the Turks back from the high ground. And this week comes the beginning of the end: evacuation from Gallipoli. There was a major plan that was actually being put into action this week, and it was Brigadier General Brudenell White's plan for the evacuation of Anzac and Suvla at Gallipoli. His plan was to conceal the evacuation until the last moment, to fool the Turks, who were otherwise capable of bombarding the beaches and causing huge casualties. It was actually a brilliant plan that was both detailed and imaginative, unlike pretty much every other plan at Gallipoli so far. In the week before evacuation, the forces would be thinned out to the bare minimum needed to hold the front line, with every effort being made for things to appear normal. One really clever part of the plan was introducing silent periods in the weeks before to get the Turks used to the absence of noise that would be apparent when the trenches emptied in the final hours. These silent periods worked. After sending over parties to investigate some of the silences and having them cut down, the Turks stopped probing. By the final night, the troops had been thinned out considerably, and on December 18th, in 3 batches at 10, midnight, 1 a.m., passenger steamers took more men away. There were now just 10,000 men at Suvla and 10,000 at Anzac. Would the Ottomans notice when the dawn came? Well, to deflect from that possibility, attacks were launched at Cape Helles on December 19th. With a simultaneous naval bombardment, the Turks were fooled, and once darkness fell, Suvla and Anzac were empty. The evacuation of the troops from Anzac and Suvla had begun December 8th, and in 12 days, 83,048 men, 4,695 horses and mules, 1,718 vehicles, and 186 heavy guns were taken off. All that was left were the 40,000 or so men at Cape Helles, and there they remained. On the 21st, the Turks claimed the evacuation was a great Turkish victory with heavy British losses. The fact is, there were exactly 3 wounded. On December 20th, Lloyd George said this in the House of Commons about the frustrating losses at Gallipoli and in Mesopotamia. Too late in moving here, too late in arriving there, too late in coming to this decision, too late in starting with enterprises, too late in preparing. In this war, the footsteps of the Allied forces have been dogged by the mocking specter of too late. And unless we quicken our movements, damnation will fall on the sacred cause for which so much gallant blood has flowed.
Am I the reason you get stoned every week now? Build up integrity, got you texting, emailing me, wanting me to feel with you. Baby, just face reality, move on.
Sometimes it's hard to face reality.